As Pastor Matt said, it's time for our testimony, so I'll try to go as fast as I can. And I did not grow up in a Christian home like a lot of you guys. And my mom and dad were both bikers. They had me, and then that only lasted a few years, and they separated. So my mom married an alcoholic Vietnam vet after that. And shortly after that, a couple of years, we moved to Lake Elsinore. My stepdad took over the family business of an Italian restaurant in Lake Elsinore, and that's where I learned how to work. I learned how to wash dishes. I learned how to bus tables and sweep and take out trash. And every morning I got to make meatballs with my dirty little hands. And Bruce Olson told me that he ate a few of those meatballs. So I was doing that for a long time, and their marriage lasted for about 8 years, and they separated. My stepdad ended up drinking himself to death and dying in the VA hospital. My mom took off, and so I was moved all over from uncles to cousins to uncles and aunts for about a year. I think I went to 4 different schools in 6th grade. And finally, my mom's parents stepped in and rescued me and took me to live with them in Whittier. And living with your grandparents is awesome. It's like Christmas every day. They spoiled me rotten. I got new shoes and new clothes. I got my own room, all the snacks and goodies I could eat. And then when I turned 16, they bought me a truck. So I was loving it. But as soon as I got my license, I went from an almost decent kid to a complete menace to society. And I was ditching school all the time. I started drinking, which led to drugs and partying and more drugs and then different drugs and then crime and then a crime spree and all these different things over and over and over. And my grandparents started to see the downward spiral in my life. So they called their church and said, hey, Nathan needs a little religion in his life. So they sent the missionaries to come talk to me, the Mormon missionaries. And so I listened to their little lessons, and a few weeks later I got baptized to make my grandparents happy. And we started going to church a little more. And I even went to youth group a couple times, and I started to meet some of the Mormon kids from high school. I'm like, wow, you're Mormon? I would never guess that. Because they were just as bad as I was. I mean, there was a few goody two-shoes, but most of them were messed up too. So, and nothing really changed for me. I was still driving all over the place, doing all kinds of horrible things all the time. And during my senior year, I got bronchitis and pneumonia at the same time. I was super, super, super sick. And unfortunately, my sinful lifestyle affected my grandpa. He got pneumonia, and then he died a week later in the hospital. So I felt super guilty for that. And I missed so much school that year that I didn't graduate on time, so I had to make up some classes in summer school. And after that, I didn't know what to do. So I thought, hey, I'll join the Army. My grandpa was in the Army. My stepdad was in the Army. A lot of Army guys in my family. So I went and talked with the recruiter. And he said I was going to have to wait a little while because I had to pay off some restitution from a crime I had committed the summer before that, and I still owed about $700 or so. And that I was going to be drug tested. So I knew I wasn't going to pass that test. So I vowed that I would never drink or do drugs again. And I thought the only way that I could do that was to be a good, faithful Mormon. And so I started getting super involved with the Mormon church. I got a job with a neighbor across the street who was a born-again Christian. He was a house painter. And he knew I was Mormon, so he would keep asking me questions about the Mormon church, and which caused me to dig a little more and a little more. And I worked with him for a little while. I got my restitution paid off. But I'd been bad for so long that I was trying to make up for it by being good and doing all the good Mormon stuff. I started going to church every single Sunday. I do all 3.5 hours. I got my temple recommend, which means I could do baptisms for the dead up at the temple in Santa Monica and patriarchal blessing. I was doing everything I could to make up for all the bad things that I did. One night, I was out fishing with a buddy, and I was trying to convert him to Mormonism, like a good Mormon. And his girlfriend and Gina walked up, and Gina overheard what we were talking about. I was talking about Mormonism, so we started battling back and forth. Gina was a Christian, and we started battling back and forth, Mormonism versus Christianity, back and forth, back and forth. And this was our second battle. I met her on a camping trip before that, and we battled all that weekend. So this was round 2. I was a little smarter now, so I thought I would win, and she still crushed me. And so I walked her to the car after we'd been arguing until about midnight, and I said, hey, will you come to my church? And she said, I'll go to your church if you go to my church. She says I never said that, but I remember that. I could have sworn I said that. Maybe I'm wrong. And so the next Wednesday, she picked me up, her and her friend. I went to Morning Star Christian Chapel. It's kind of like a Calvary chapel. And I loved it. I never heard worship like that before. I've never heard the Bible taught like that before, because Mormon church is super boring. It's horrible. It is horrible. And so I started hanging out with them, going every Wednesday night I could, and I even went to the Monday night college group a couple times, and everybody started to hear that there was a Mormon hanging out there at the church, and I was getting all kinds of questions. I was even sitting in some classes at Biola with some of her friends that were enrolled there, because I was planning on going on my mission for the Mormon church in the spring, and they told me that their number one target group was born-again Christians because they had some of the truth but not all of it. So I figured I was going to be somewhere here in America and work on that, so I wanted to be a good missionary. So I was gathering all this intel from the Christian church and at Biola and hearing all these different things. And they would give me all these questions. I didn't have the answers for it. So I wrote them down. I had a meeting with my bishop, one of the head guys at the Mormon church. Bishop's supposed to know everything. And sat down with him, asked him some of the questions. He answered a few of my questions, but I was pretty surprised at how many questions he couldn't answer. And so I was like, Next week I went back to Biola, and there was a girl there that heard that there was some Mormon on campus asking questions. So she made sure she found me, and she sat me down, and she was born and raised in Utah. She knew everything about the Mormon church. And she sat me down at the lunch tables and probably spent a couple hours there with me telling all these horrible things about the Mormon church, which I didn't think was true. So I wrote all these things down, made another appointment with the bishop, and said, hey, Bishop, what about this, that, and that, and this? And he's like, stop hanging out with them. Don't go there anymore. Don't listen to them, blah, blah, blah. And so I was kind of torn. You know, my grandfather, he was Mormon. He was the smartest guy I knew. The Mormon church couldn't be wrong. The Mormons were so nice. And then, but what about all this evidence that all these Christians are popping out? So I stopped hanging out with them, and I stopped hanging out with the Mormons altogether. I didn't hang out with anybody. I got some books, and I spent about a week and a half in my room, fasting and praying and studying. And I wasn't even studying Mormon scriptures versus the Bible. I was just studying Mormon stuff to Mormon stuff, and there were so many things. Going into it, I had about 30 questions. Coming out of it, I had about 300 questions. And so I realized that the Mormon church was not the true church. There was way too many things wrong with it. There's no way God was this confused. So I called up Gina and said, hey, I'm leaving the Mormon church. And they were excited. And so she said, hey, there's a Harvest Crusade up at the Universal Amphitheater. So we drove up there and listened to Greg Laurie, gave the message. I couldn't wait to go down there. I'm like, what am I supposed to do? And she's like, when they call you to come down there, go down to the stage and accept the Lord. Do your public profession of faith. So as soon as he says, okay, if you want, I was down the aisle, ran down there, first one down there, waiting in line. And went through there, said the prayer, all that. And they gave me a little Bible. And then after that, we celebrated with my first caffeinated mocha. And so after that, I started going to church every single Sunday with them, all 3 services in the morning, Sunday nights. And then we'd go to Singspiration at Biola after that. And then a Monday night college group. Wednesday night, we would drive around to different Calvaries to see what the pastors look like and all kinds of stuff. 6 months later, I got involved with the usher ministry. And then shortly after that, I started helping out with the beach camps for the youth. And then I went on a short-term missions trip to Mexico. And I was loving it. I couldn't get enough. If the doors were open, I was down there. So the senior pastor asked me if I wanted the janitor position that was opening up, and I said sure, so I could be at church all the time now, and it was awesome. And then started working out more with the youth and all that. They opened up an extension campus for the School of Ministry from Calvary Costa Mesa, so I did the first year of that, but not enough people signed up the next year, so they closed it. And during this time, Pastor Carey, who was the youth pastor here before Jason, so we have Shane now, then it was Jason, and then it was Carey, and before that was Joe Ryder. So Carey moved down here, and I was visiting with him on the weekends, and I loved it down here. And I finally went on a week-long missions trip to the orphanage, and I really got to meet and get to know Doug and Eric and Dan Reed and Dave Shell and all these wonderful guys. And I was like, wow. I told Carey when we came back, hey, I would love to move to Temecula someday. He's like, okay. And so I came down for an all-church work day a week later, and Geneva Cragg introduced herself to me and said, hey, I heard you're looking for a house, for a place to live. I said, yeah. She's like, both my kids are going off to college, so I have an open room. Great. And then later on, that same day, I think, the church offered me the maintenance, janitorial, youth intern job here at church. And I was like, awesome. And as soon as I moved in, Dan Reed got me a job at Calvary Marietta as a yard aide. So within like 2 weeks, I had 2 jobs and a place to live. So I was like, awesome. God was all over the place, all over that, making things happen. So I thought, this is great, and all I need now is a wife. And so Geneva Craig set me up on this new thing called email. And, there's been some prospects and things like that throughout the years, but there was always one girl that I really, really wanted, and that was Gina. And I made the fatal mistake of dating one of her friends. And she was engaged to one of my friends, but it didn't work out. So I thought, hey, what do I got to lose? I sent her this super long email. It took me like 5 hours to type this thing out to make sure that it was perfect. And I sent it off, and I waited, and I waited, and I waited, and I waited. And finally I get the response, oh, thank you so much. I'm so flattered, but I don't want to be in a relationship right now. I want to be a missionary someday off in France. And I thought, okay, great. No problem. That's off my chest. I said it. It's out there. It's done. So that was like September, October. And then come December, I find out through the grapevine that Gina has a new boyfriend. And I was like, oh, man, I can't believe this. It didn't work out. It was a very short thing, and I got over it. I really didn't talk to Gina for a while. And finally, she joined us on a missions trip to the orphanage again. And I kind of kept my distance from her, and I was still a little upset inside. But the last day of the trip, I let her have it. And I just told her, hey, I can't believe you did that. I can't believe, how much I like you and all these different things. I can't believe some of the guys you date. I never treat you like that. I just went on. And I just kind of left it at that. And then finally, like a day or later or so, I finally get the phone call that I've been waiting for 5 years, where she says, hey, you're right. Thank you so much for liking me as much as you do, and I want to be with you. So I was like, yes. She moved down shortly after that, and in the summer of 2000, then she got a job in Escondido. I remember on our first date, I asked her what her intentions were with me. If she just wanted to be boyfriend and girlfriend for a while, and she's like, no, I want to marry you. So I was like, yes. Finally, 5 years I've been trying. I even painted her dad's bathroom for years before that. So I thought, awesome, but now what? I make like $1,900 a month. I don't have any money, and I'm the maintenance guy. What am I supposed to do? So I thought, hey, I'll join the military. I always wanted to do that, and I'll pick the Marine Corps. It's just right around the corner, and boot camps in San Diego. How hard can it be? Right? It's only 1 week in a month, 2 weeks in the summer. So I signed up, and then after I signed up, I told Gina the good news, and she was not happy, to say the least. And I remember her saying, what if there's a war or something? And I said, relax, there hasn't been a war for like 10 years. And so I went to boot camp in January 2001, graduated that. Then I went to the School of Infantry, and I finished with that, and I got my job back here at Rancho Baptist Church. And then we got married in November 2001. In the spring of 2003, I enrolled at the Bible college full-time. I always wanted to do that, and this was my chance. So I enrolled there, and a month later, 6 weeks later, Gina was right. There was a war. And I got my reserve unit got activated, and I spent most of 2003 in Iraq. So when I got home, Gina says, hey, you're a little weird and disconnected. And I was. And she thinks it's from the vaccines. But we were talking about that last night. They pump you so full of stuff. But so we took a super long vacation to North Carolina to visit her family, and we loved it out there. Everything was so green and cheap, and all of her family was out there, and they were super wonderful to us. So it didn't take us long. We came home, prayed about it, and shortly after that, we moved to North Carolina. We lived with her grandma for a little while while we built our own house. And then Gina got a job with GE doing loans. I started building houses with her uncle and one of his friends and learning a lot of things. I wanted to get involved out there in church because I never really sat in church ever since I got saved. And so I tried to get involved with the youth ministry there, and they just hired a new youth pastor, and he was all gung-ho, Lone Ranger. He didn't want any help. So Gina put my resume out online, and a small little country church called us, and I interviewed, and they ended up hiring us as a part-time youth pastor. And the first year, they paid me $350 a month. For the next year, they bumped it up to $850, so it was good. It was like 40 miles away, so it barely covered the gas, but Gina and I loved it. And then Gina started doing her own business with high-end faux finishing, and I started my own landscaping business and pressure washing, and we were doing good. And we were starting to flip houses with her uncle. So then Shane and James came along in the summer of 2006. We sold our house and bought 5 acres, a couple lots over from her family. They all lived on one big parcel. and we bought a lot right next to that, and 100-year-old oak trees and stream running through it. It was amazing. We were getting ready to build a bigger, better house there. But I always had this burning desire to finish Bible college. I had to finish Bible college. I had to finish Bible college. So we put everything on hold and moved back out here. Eric and I enrolled in the fall of 2007 over at the Bible college, and we knocked it out in 2 years. And during my last semester in 2009, I became the full-time children's pastor here. We didn't move back to North Carolina. And in 2012, Justin was born. And then January of this year, our first baby girl was born, baby Taylor. And so the past 7 years has been huge here, and the Lord has stretched us in so many ways. And Gina and I have been blown away by the Lord's faithfulness, His provision, and His grace towards us. And God has been so good to us. So I had a great time writing all this stuff out. This is the short version. I encourage you guys to write yours out too, and just get on there and see how the Lord has been working. Even before you were a believer, He was working and stuff like that. And it doesn't matter how bad you think you are, how bad you've been, we can't out-sin God's grace. So hopefully that encourages you guys.